All right, hey everyone, welcome to a live episode of the Copy Corner with your host Terry Schilling.
And Dan Marzullo.
And yes, and if you are watching live, you can see here, and I'm sure you've read the subtitles and all the headlines of what we're going to be talking about on this episode today. But we got Jacob McMillen here to talk about how do you get so good at SEO. But Jacob, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Yeah, we were just joking. It does feel like a Neil Patel webinar or just some I don't know, how do you get so good at SEO? It just seems a little corny, but I'm like, you know what? I've hung with Jacob before online. I feel like this is suitable for our conversation today.
Get good.
Yeah, get good.
How
get
to
really
get
well.
good.
Yeah. But honestly, I feel like the title, it's so interesting. It fits why we want to talk to you and brought you on. Because we were talking again right before that, you look up how to become a copywriter, copywriting, Jacob McMillen stuff shows up there. He has the course, he has free articles, and you put a lot of work into it. We just wanted to dive into a little bit of your strategy and then answer some other, just ask some questions and riff about, getting good at SEO, especially as a solo business owner, which I think is really, really hard for a lot of people.
Yeah, that's a whole nother challenge, right? It's not, you don't have this giant team behind you, right?
Yeah. I don't. Yeah. So for those watching who also don't have a giant team behind them, hopefully what I say will be, actually relevant, not like, hey, just hand it over to your full-time, content strategist and your 10-person writing team and have them take care of it. Easy peasy.
As simple as that, right?
Yeah, simple as that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what was your first big piece that got ranked on page 1 of Google, the coveted page 1?
So I think the first time I had my first SEO success was ranking for the term professional copywriter. It was the first business related term I tried to rank for. And essentially what I did is I just did some on-page targeting on my, I don't remember if it was my homepage or my basic service. I think it was I think I threw up a service page and I made the URL, jacobmcmillen.com /professional copywriter. And then I just I was doing a lot of guest posts and a lot of paid writing assignments for business and marketing and finance blogs. And so I would throw, in my byline, Jacob McMillen is a professional copywriter, and hyperlink that to this page.
Nice.
And after doing that for a couple months, I started to show up, and got up to, I think, the #1 spot for professional copywriter. And that felt really cool, which was then immediately followed by realizing it was a little more of a party trick than an actual lead generator. Because as much as it was cool to be hey, Google professional copywriter, it's me. People who are hiring copywriters weren't Googling professional copywriter really a whole lot and then hiring the person that they clicked on. So I did start to get a few leads through that, but I realized professional copywriter just wasn't really the right term to rank for. And so that sort of, I'd had some other experiences of trying to rank for stuff and then ranking for things that didn't actually do anything for me or the blog I was trying to rank it for. And so that kind of got me thinking, man, I feel like I have some tools to rank for something. I just need to figure out what I'm supposed to rank for. And so I started really digging into keyword research and trying to understand that. And learning keyword research to this day, I think, is the most frustrating thing I've ever gone through the process of learning. I'm trying to learn Spanish right now. I think at the end of the day, that'll kick my ass more than keyword research did. But but up to this point, I think what it was is just trying to learn keyword research. You read all these articles and they make sense. It seems pretty straightforward. But at the end of the day, you're sitting down and you're staring at a bunch of data from these keyword tools and trying to make sense of all this data when it's all contextual, and you don't have the context. So you look up a keyword and you see all these numbers and it's the fuck do these numbers mean? You know? And then like you look up another keyword and the numbers are completely different. And it's like, so this one, like the most traffic in this niche is 1,000 words per month. And then this one, it's 200,000 words. Like, what does that mean? What does that tell me about anything? What are my actionable takeaways from this? And so for me, learning SEO is kind of like a 1 year, learning keyword research in particular was like a 1 year process of constantly looking at these numbers, constantly trying to rank for stuff, and then evaluating what the actual end benefit of ranking for it was, how quickly I ranked for it. It's just kind of like you learn over time as you're consistently looking, watching the numbers, and then actually making an effort to rank for stuff and comparing the results. You start to get a feel for what the numbers mean. And that's the best way I can describe it. You just build this feel over time to where now when I sit down and I look at these numbers, I can throw out a bunch of predictions that usually end up being pretty accurate. And I have a really like strong sense of what everything means, but there was no shortcut to that. I just sort of had to, one analogy I like to use with SEO and sometimes marketing in general is just, banging your head against a brick wall until like cracks either your head or the wall. I feel like that's what it was. It was just like banging my head until something started to crack, and who knows which one it was, but I seem to be getting some good results. So.
That is too funny. From that like trial and error process, then have you kind of identified any themes that are like always true that you kind of break out that you would offer up as advice for other solopreneurs trying to tackle this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the big conceptual theme is the people who take the mantra of creating the best resource available for any given search intent are the people who win. Like whoever's taking that mantra of what do people want to see here and how can I give them the best possible, result for what they're looking for, win. And some people do that by throwing a lot of money at it. A lot of people throwing a lot of money at it, they're throwing a lot of money at a lot of different terms. And so if you just come in and take if you just take it more seriously for any specific term, you can, I've outranked like $100 million+ companies that are throwing massive budgets at SEO just because like they have a whole team, and when you have a big team and a big budget, it's SEO is more about building systems to get solid content out across a wide range of keywords than it is really like tackling in a specific piece. So most of the big teams out there with the big sites bringing in millions and millions of views, they're like very fallible on specific high-end keywords. Like you can like really scalpel out, a certain subset of keywords for your business, even with massively lower budget. And, there's a certain point where it's raw numbers, like who has more links, who has more content, who has the better links. But there's a pretty wide gap between, if you can get enough links, if you can do enough of these other things and you come in with better content, where you can grab these rankings. And for me, like with my website, the reason I'm able to rank for everything for copywriting is partially because some of the biggest players in the space have been a little bit dormant for a while. Like Copyblogger used to be a big one. They owned all the rankings. They've just over the years, like not, their focus has drifted to other sides of their business than the actual Copyblogger content. And so, like the door kind of opened up there. Copy Hackers was a big one for a while, but they've never really like dialed in their SEO targeting. Like they make really good content, but they don't really, their on-page SEO isn't that strong. And so, like stuff like that, like a lot of these players, they weren't really heavily going after SEO. So I just came in and with every single piece of content I did, I just tried to make it the best online and the most targeted in terms of SEO, and was able to get, all these, like a lot of these rankings across the board, which fortunately I still hold. I keep waiting for the person who's going to show up and just try to like,
oh man. Yeah. What's been the most rewarding piece of content that you've created? And then to piggyback that too, Well, I'll pause there. Just let me know. Just tell us that, and then I have a follow-up question.
Yeah, so definitely I made like a really comprehensive guide to building a freelance copywriting business.
Okay.
And I was originally trying to rank that for how to I think it was how to be a copywriter. I think that's what it was. I think it was how to become a copywriter. That's what it was.
Okay.
How to become a copywriter.
Yeah.
I ended up getting the #1 ranking for that. And then all of a sudden one day, Google was like, hey, we're going to take the top 3 results for how to become a copywriter and throw them onto the base word copywriter. And so all of a sudden I went from just being #1 for how to become a copywriter to being #1 for the word copywriter.
For the one copywriter.
And I've been in the top 3. It kind of cycles up and down of that for several years now. So that's obviously, that's a one-word keyword. That's obviously been a pretty big win. It's hard. I don't think there's any other piece of content on my site that does better than that one.
Yeah. Okay.
And that was pretty straightforward. Just trying to make the best possible guide I had for someone who's wanting to become a copywriter, and try to help deliver some really practical stuff while also answering the questions that people come in with. I think that's kind of a trick when you guys can probably relate to this when you are into a career, into a topic of expertise for a while. Some of the questions that are important to beginners start to lose importance to you personally. And so trying to kind of always be conscious of like, what are like the really important things that I know 10 years into this, they need to hear, but also what are the things that I think don't really matter, but I know they care about, and doing both of those, combining those, that's a constant struggle for me because it's easy for me to forget the stuff that I don't think is important anymore, but everyone else does. But when you're trying to create any sort of content, mixing those two things of like, how can I give people what they want and then slip in what they need is kind of, I think, how you make really, really good and effective content. So it's helping people, but also, being performing well for your business or whatever your marketing intent in creating the content is.
Yeah, that leads into the follow-up, because of course you want to create a valuable piece of content that helps people, right? But what was your end goal with that, with like how to become a copywriter? Like, did you have that from the beginning, or was it just like, oh, this will be cool to rank for this, and I see a path, but then it's just like, what next? Of course, for your benefit too.
So I think any piece of content you make, you want to be really clear about what you want it to accomplish. There are millions of pieces of content that gets made every single day, the vast majority of which will never bring in any sort of benefit to the person who publishes it. And the only way to skip through that is to be real clear on your intent and design the content to the intent. So with this content, I wanted to rank for how to become a copywriter. That was my sole goal in writing that piece, was to rank for that and then get anyone who read it, like, to subscribe to my email list, or at least take notice of my brand. At the time, I didn't have any products. I didn't have anything any sort of business I was building necessarily on that traffic, but I was thinking I would at some point down the road. And I knew that if I could get my website ranking for a copywriting related term, then anything I was doing to try to bring, leads to my business, it just would help me rank for other copywriting terms. So at the time, my immediate goal was just to rank for that term with the purpose of increasing my overall website authority around the copywriting, topical category. And, the way I was monetizing that at the time was ranking, service pages that would then bring in leads to my freelance copywriting business. And then, now the primary way I monetize that particular keyword is through people signing up for my email list and purchasing some of my digital products. So I knew there was potential for both. And just, I wanted to increase my domain authority around that topic.
Okay. I'm curious too, how long did this process take from like ranking and then getting to the point where you're bringing in enough leads and selling products? Because I think I mean, unless you did this in less than a year, but of course, I just want people to understand,
Yeah.
the success is not built overnight,
So
myth.
back when I first started getting into SEO, what I was trying to rank for was keywords with clear hiring intent. So that was why I chose professional copywriter, because I thought if someone's typing in professional copywriter, they're looking to hire someone. Like that's the type of thing you look. And I was right. It's just that's not the language people were using. So when I from there, what I transitioned to next was trying to rank for website copywriter. So like a specific deliverable. I ended up ranking number 1 for that. And that's when I really started bringing in leads to the site. The actual timeline of ranking for website copywriter was probably like anywhere from 3 to 6 months. Okay. I usually say 3 months is like the minimum amount to get any sort of ranking that, like, if you potentially can rank for it, 3 months is sort of the timeline to rank for it. That can vary wildly. It started varying, like more recently, I've seen stuff rank quicker than they used to. But if you go in, you want to give a little bit of a lead time. That said, this also came off the back end of me ranking for stuff that didn't help me for like a year and a half, trying to figure out, what I did want to rank for. But once I actually knew the process of ranking for it wasn't that long, just because not a lot of other copywriters were trying to do SEO. There was like 2 or 3 copywriters who had in the world who had like gone through and made service pages for different topical categories and were really trying to do SEO. Most of them are still ranking today. The space is just not that competitive. That's why I always recommend, like, if you have a niche that you're targeting, throw up a service page targeting that, that niche, take it to 2,000 words and, throw a few byline backlinks in there pointing to it and see what can happen. A lot of times it's that simple. But then from there, once I started to look to rank like more general terms, like instead of just like a niche, like just educational stuff, how to become a copywriter. The funny thing is, when I wrote that article, I put in the article, I'm trying to rank this article for how to become a copywriter. And I think it's going to take me about 12 months to do it. Nice. And to 12, or like, I think I said, like, I think it's going to take me like 6 months to get into the top, like half of the first page and 12 months to get to number 1. And I talked about earlier how you get a feel for like keyword research over time. Like I was within like 2 weeks on all my predictions, like getting it into the front page, getting it into the top 3, and then getting it to number 1. Like I literally called my shots on it, and it like played out like literally within 14 days on each of my predictions. So that was kind of cool to see.
Man.
That actually, it took me a full year to get the number 1 spot.
Yeah, man, there's not a lot of copywriters because everybody else is writing SEO for other people instead of their own business, which you've
man.
taken
and
advantage
honestly, of. That's how I got all, like, most of the vast majority of my rankings I got when I found out my second kiddo was on the way. I had been trying to build an agency, and then I had just scrapped it because I realized I hated running an agency. And so I was kind of like, okay, do I just refill this with just freelance work? Found out I had, my second kiddo on the way. I was like, I got 9 months here to really take a stab at like building my own thing. And so what I did is the main client I had for that agency, I had gone through and got them ranking for every consulting and consultant keyword. So like, consultant, how to become a consultant, how to build a consulting business, a bunch of stuff like that, like across the board, just number 1 or 2 for all these keywords. And I was like, I've kind of wanted to do a copywriting course. Why don't I spend like 12 months, make the course, try to rank for like all the copywriting terms, just make content, and I had to completely stop freelancing to do that. Like, because it's so hard when the option is get paid immediately and do something for someone versus like do something for yourself, hoping it will pay off down the road. I never chose myself. I've been wanting to for years. I never did. So I just had to cut out all the work and just do it. And I figured,
Yeah.
If in 12 months I'm not like making at least half my freelancing income, I'll go back to freelancing. Like, you know, no big deal. And then got all those rankings. The course was well received. It worked out. And so I kept running with that. But I definitely had to do the stop working with clients. And I think that's why the space is so uncompetitive, because everyone else that would want to do that, they got all these people throwing money at them to go, you know, and
yeah, I'd feel you.
Demand is strong, man. Like
I'm there. There's always the procrastination of like, I'll spend some time on myself to do this. And then, you know, you need to pay bills or just like a referral or that email comes in of a new work. And you're like, well, let's take this money and like work on this cool project.
Yeah. Right.
I have a dude this month paying me $5,000 per blog post. And I'm like, I'm just sitting here like, I don't know if I'm ever going to get back to doing my own stuff again. It's hard to say no to that, man. Like the demand for long form right now is just so strong. It's insane.
Yeah. I'm sure Dan, you can attest to that too.
Yeah, for sure. At this point then in your career, are you pretty split? Like, do you know, half of your focus is on your products and then half on client work, or what does that look like for you today?
So for the last 3 years, it's been probably 90% my own stuff. I have the education business, and then I bought some other websites, content driven websites, and like was growing those, kind of building out a little portfolio. Then I realized I'm too ADHD to run a portfolio. So I decided to cut back and, you know, just kind of go back to just doing my own thing. But then lately I've been realizing some other mental health challenges are making me like constantly feeling like, especially since the pandemic started, like just being, there's something about being an entrepreneur that's inherently stressful and kind of like, you know, being just everything kind of coming down to your own stuff. No matter how many months in a row it works, there's always that part of you that like, you never get to clock out, you know, like weekends aren't weekends. Like you're always thinking about the stuff you got to do. And so I've been seriously considering going back in house just for my mental health and just basically to, you know, be able to clock out for the first time in like 10 years. I don't know if I will, you know, like it'd have to be a pretty unique situation. But I've been doing a little more freelancing work just because it helps a little bit. It's kind of the halfway point to me between doing solely my own stuff and being in house is like focus on a client, hit the deliverable, forget about it for like, you know, like a few days and then think about the next thing. But I don't know, man.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel that. I mean, sometimes it's really enticing to go back to like a full-time role, but it would have to be such a good fit after doing something on your own for so long. But then like
so picky. It really
does. It really does. And then I would just like a huge caveat if I did would be like, look, I'm going to build my brand and build things on the side. I would just stop doing and chasing client work for my own self, because now I have a workload that I know is coming. But then I would hopefully have time to focus on the personal stuff. As you said, you almost took a year off to do it. But I mean, that would be the ideal goal where I could like create courses or do things like that. But yeah, again, you get very picky.
Yeah. I mean, you really do. I think with remote work being a lot more common now, like I think it changes the game a bit on, you know, at the end of the day, a full-time client is almost just a huge anchor gig, right? You know, like it can be that if you want it to be. You can still do other stuff.
Totally.
But it's a fascinating world. It keeps you. It's always interesting. Like
absolutely.
I'm never bored. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Right.
We got some people.
Hey,
Brittany's saying hi. Annie Stevens is joining us too, watching along on LinkedIn. And she has a question for you, Jacob. Would it be hard to walk away from that amount of money you make in freelancing?
Yeah. So because I've built some recurring, you know, product sales streams through my site, like right now, if I were to take a full-time job, that would keep operating. You know, there's a lot about that that's evergreen. So I wouldn't necessarily be walking away from that. And if you're just joining now, I I did walk away from about 20K a month in freelancing income to build that stream in the first place. So I've already been through the process of taking a big pay cut temporarily. Earlier in my career, there was a client that I really wanted to, I knew they were going to give me budget to work with in SEO that I hadn't had anywhere else. And I wanted to see what I could do. Like if I wanted to use it as a learning experience. So I took like a 40% pay cut to kind of make them a semi-exclusive client for a year and see what I could do in SEO. And I learned so much from that that's come back to me, in the form of several $100K additional money over the last couple of years that like I made more in the end. So I'm definitely used to the feeling of taking a bit of a pay cut or dropped pay to do stuff. At this point, like there's such strong demand that I don't even know that I necessarily have to take a massive pay cut if I were to go in-house. There's some places I could potentially get hired at a similar amount to what I'm making freelancing. And then I'd still have the income coming in from, some of the product streams I've built. So, but it definitely would have to be a really unique fit. I had a few conversations last year with different companies that there was always something that just made it not worth, transitioning over. But I think the idea of being able to clock out is probably more appealing than the actual experience of being in-house would be, which is why I've been hesitant to actually do it, but who knows?
Yeah. You may think you have all this creative control, if you will, or decision making, and then you don't, and you're like, this isn't fun. Like nobody tells you what to do except me.
Right. Grass is always greener, right?
Yeah. Annie has a follow-up question. She's taking over this show, so congrats, Annie, on that accomplishment today. Would you say optimizing SEO content on your site was the best way to get leads for your courses to find you?
So, so creating keyword-specific content was both how I built my freelancing business and then later how I built my course sales business. So when I was selling my services, I ranked for website copywriter. I ranked for like expert copywriter, professional copywriter. Some of those worked better than others, was a topic that we discussed earlier in the show. But basically specific deliverables, ranking service pages for those was very effective at bringing in leads. And that's how I grew. That's how I grew my freelance services business, to 6 figures and beyond. And then, when I went to do the course, sell courses, it was the same thing, going after, people who are looking to learn copywriting. What are they searching? Throw out blog content that ranks specifically for those things, get them into an email funnel, and then, just offer the course as part of that funnel.
Awesome. I'm curious, Jacob, when you write like a 2,000 piece for like website copywriting, how much like research, if you will, because goes into it, and how much of it was just really, I'm going to write my own experiences and then kind of clean it up from there? Because it seems like that's, from my perspective, it seems that's what worked compared to like backlinks all the time or something.
Yeah. So when I approach a specific piece of content, and I'm going to throw a link in the chat here, or I guess that's the private chat. Is there a way to get that into the?
Yeah, I can share it.
So it's just my website /SEO-copywriting. That goes through my full process for writing a piece of content and optimizing it for SEO. But the most important piece of that process is once I have the keyword target, I Google it and I look at, what's ranking, what are the top 10 results? Why do I think they're ranking? Which aspects of this are the best? Like I'll look through and I'll see what's the article at number 1 doing that the article at number 2 is not doing, and vice versa. And then I'll try to think through, I'll try to reverse engineer what's good about those pieces and then also find what's missing. And there's always something missing because, there's always more you can do to make something better. When I'm writing content on copywriting, I structure it based on like a lesson plan. So I'm, if I had people in a classroom and I was wanting to take them from A to Z on learning, nothing about copyright, knowing nothing about copywriting, to, like, for example, how to become a copywriter, to actually running a copywriting business. What do I need to take them through? What context do I need to establish? What goals are they thinking about that I need to discuss? What's the first step in that journey? What's the sequential steps, that build off of each other? I'm structuring it that way. And then I'm inserting my personal experience into each piece to make it more than just really like dry information, to connect it to like actual experience, and connect it to not just my own experience, but experiences I've seen from others. Like, in that piece, I have an interview with Michal Isakowitz, who built her business on LinkedIn when, I never did LinkedIn. I built my business on, or I did LinkedIn, but I built my business through SEO. She did no SEO and, was doing very great numbers solely through LinkedIn. So stuff like that, where I'm thinking, how can I insert my personal experience to make this a better resource? And how can I go beyond my personal experience? Because a lot of the stuff you'll write over the course of your career will not be connected to your personal experience. So you have to be able to think beyond that and think, what first person sources of data, where can I do research to find, things that I'm not currently aware of. So it's a mixture of all those things. Obviously, the more personal experience you have, the easier that's going to be, the faster it's going to be, the more effective it's going to be. And that's why I've been able to do a great job on the copywriting terms, because I have so much firsthand experience. But my first journey in really ranking for some of these nationally competitive things was for a CRO agency. And we were ranking A/B testing stuff. I had never done A/B testing in my life at that point. Even being a copywriter, none of my clients had ever actually been sophisticated enough to be split testing. But it was the same process. It was, how can I take advantage of actual firsthand experts, people who do have that expertise? How can I pull them in? How can I leverage their understanding to create really helpful pieces beyond even, what I know myself?
Yeah, that makes sense. So then at this point, with all these robust resources out there and ranking for these terms, are you turning away a lot of leads if you're at capacity that you get from these efforts, or what does that look like for you?
Yeah. So there's a lot of leads that don't go anywhere. For a while, I tried to like pass those off, or, I tried a couple different methods, like hiring some people to kind of white label some stuff. Like just passing them off for a referral fee, all sorts of things. Honestly, there was no super effective way I found to like really take advantage of those. So I mostly just kind of reorganized my site to push traffic away from the lead pages or away from the service lead pages and more to the education lead pages. Just because I wasn't able to do much. And so I still get some that filter through, and I'll occasionally pass them to people in like Right Minds or, things like that. But overall, it's died down a bit because of how I've restructured my site.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Cool.
Yeah, you mentioned Right Minds in there. And if people who are either somewhat familiar with Jacob or first time hearing from him, he has this private copywriting group that's opened up once a quarter. You open it up more or less, or every 3 months.
I just relaunched it, and it's like it's a little different. It's just people can join at any time.
Okay.
If you just Google Right Minds, you'll find it. But Terry, you were in it for a while.
Yeah,
basically, it's kind of it's tackling. It's a little bit tackling the educational side and helping people grow, but it's also just sort of, freelancing is kind of a lonely ass job, like, having some people who do what you do, who you can hop on a call with once a week is, I need it. Like, I kind of run that group solely like for my own personal, like, hey, I need to talk to other freelancers sometimes.
You need to have a network. Yeah.
Well, I think it's just a good example, because Dan and I have talked about it on this show, and then, between the two of us off of it, of just like what's going to continue to be, or what's next for us to grow our business, and, other ways to monetize it, if you will. And I just think as a solopreneur, freelancer, copywriter, Jacob, you've been a good example of like, all right, get good at SEO, and then, you get this traffic. How can I keep expanding that? And you turn that into a private group. You're turning it into courses and digital products, just showing listeners too what's possible out there, as well.
Yeah, it's really like when you have distribution, you can kind of do whatever you want. Like, if you look at the people on LinkedIn who have like 50K followers, 100K followers, like it may seem like the way they're structuring their content and sales is what's making them money. And to some extent, some of them do a better job than others. But when you have that sort of distribution, you can kind of sell whatever you want. You can make whatever you want. You can sell whatever you want. Like, like when you have the ability to get something in front of people and you can offer something they want, you can sell it, And so for me, my distribution's SEO. So anytime I have an idea of how I want to pivot my business a little, I have that recurring, hey, there's new people showing up to my site every single month who are interested in this topic. So in any place I can pivot that's relevant to those people, it gives me that freedom to adjust and experiment with my business how I want. And
it's awesome.
And so it opens up a lot of options. So any effort you can put in to build distribution for yourself is something that you'll be able to draw from and monetize and experiment with for the rest of your career.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Great point. Absolutely. You can kind of point your offers to that audience you built there for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. You are a confident person, Jacob, but do you get imposter syndrome?
So definitely, for sure. I think it's been less. It's definitely been less and less over the course of my career. Just because the deeper you go in a space, like you become really aware of how little you know. So like that feeds the imposter syndrome a bit, but it's also the other side of that is you see how little everyone else knows. You see how like people making 10 times more than you are like winging it just as much as you are. They understand one little piece, like they understand this one thing that just creates insane, revenue for themselves. They don't know anything else. They're just like piecing together everything else on the fly. But they know that one thing and they can make it work for them. And so I think for me, I've realized like, I really understand long form content and ranking long form content, and everything else I feel kind of like an amateur in to some extent. But that one thing, I think I'm probably like top 50 in the world in. And that gives me confidence that I can enter into a conversation around that and feel like I know what I'm talking about, which kind of makes up for the fact that I feel like I don't know anything about anything else, that I'm a complete imposter on every other topic, like literally like email copywriting. I've written emails that have made me several $100,000, and I still feel like I don't really understand email copywriting. I'm like an imposter on that topic. So it's kind of a two-edged sword, and I think I've been able to dial my emotions to more feed from the thing I feel like I do know, and worry less about all the stuff that I don't know.
Yeah. Oh man, it's good though. You also just get to know where to spend your energy to figure it out, some of the stuff that you don't know too, which is
absolutely,
which is great. Yeah.
You realize you don't need to know everything. Like
absolutely. For sure. Oh man. Well, Jacob, we can wrap up, this, again, very insightful, candid interview with you. We appreciate your time. Dan, any final questions, regarding SEO?
I think that's it for me, Terry. I think you kind of hit on all the ones I had.
Yeah, I agree. I guess the last thing I would just to give listeners here is just like, what would be, it may sound cliche, but maybe give them like one tool to invest in to help with their SEO.
Ooh, that's
like a software tool.
Yeah.
So I mentioned earlier that I think keyword research is the hard part of SEO. Like I think everything else is super easy. If you read that blog post that I linked, like you'll see my on-page SEO is like a 5-point checklist, like a super simple, anyone can do it, 5 bullet points. And everything else about SEO is super easy. Keyword research, it's hard, it's experiential. You just have to like basically do it to learn it over time. If you are going to go through that process, I definitely recommend Ahrefs, ahrefs.com. I think they're the best in that vein. I've heard SEMrush can be a little bit more beginner friendly. So if you're just digging into SEO, that's another one. Those are kind of the two big ones.
Okay.
So, just understand, like, if you do dive into that and look at the price tag on that, just understand, like, you don't need to pay for that tool to do SEO. That's for if you're really going to be doing keyword research as a service, you'll need something like that. But the best way to do SEO early on is to just pick a term, pick a keyword term. The best thing to start with, if you're brand new, pick your niche and copywriter. So, if you do copywriting in the finance space, like, create a page targeting finance copywriter. You don't need to know anything about keyword research for that. Just follow the steps in that article I linked, and it's all conceptual. It's all thinking and writing, common sense. There's no, if you follow the checklist, there's really no like specific expertise required. All the expertise is connected to the keyword research. So
okay, cool.
Yeah.
For those watching, I threw it on the screen here, but for those listening too, it's Jacob McMillen, MCMILLEN.com/SEO/copywriting or -copywriting. Sorry. So go check that out. And we'll link that in the show notes as well. But awesome. Jacob, great advice. It's always fun talking with you. It's, a lot of, lately it's been through tweets, so it's good to see your lovely face again. And the last time I saw, I don't think if we're watching this, Jacob has this really nice sleeve tattoo. I forget if you had that back when we talked in the beginning of the pandemic.
Unless no. I got this in January. I went down to Colombia actually to get this.
Oh, amazing. Oh my gosh. Awesome. Oh, wow. Well, and everybody who is tuning in live, thanks for your questions and in having some conversations with us. For everybody who listens to the Copy Corner, we appreciate you. Go ahead, like, rate, subscribe on Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcast. But yes, Jacob, thanks again for the time.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in and doing this for us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. This was fun.
All right, everybody. We'll see you on the next episode. Take care.